Sarah, a young woman living alone in a quaint suburban house, enjoyed her solitude. Her home was her sanctuary, a place of peace and quiet after long workdays. But as the days passed, Sarah began to notice strange occurrences. It started with faint whispers at night, barely audible yet persistent. She dismissed them as tricks of the mind, a result of fatigue. However, the whispers grew louder, becoming more distinct, and the once comforting silence of her home turned oppressive. Little did Sarah know, her solitude was about to be shattered by something far more sinister than she could imagine. One night, as Sarah lay in bed, she heard the whispers again, this time accompanied by soft tapping sounds coming from within the walls. Startled, she sat up and strained to listen. The tapping grew more rhythmic, almost like a heartbeat, and the whispers became clearer, as if someone was speaking right next to her ear. "Who's there?" Sarah called out, but there was no response. The house remained still, save for the eerie sounds. She tried to sleep, but the sensation of being watched kept her awake, her once peaceful home now a source of growing dread. Determined to uncover the source of the noises, Sarah decided to investigate. She walked through the darkened house, her footsteps echoing on the hardwood floors. The tapping and whispers seemed to follow her, growing louder as she approached the walls. With trembling hands, she pressed her ear against the cold surface, hoping to hear something more distinct. Suddenly, a sharp knock echoed from inside the wall, startling her. It was as if someone was trapped within, desperately trying to get out. Panic surged through her, but Sarah steeled herself. She had to know what was causing this torment. Sarah's search led her to the basement, a place she rarely visited. The walls down there seemed thicker, older, and more foreboding. As she scanned the room, her eyes landed on a small, barely noticeable door in the corner, covered by old furniture. Curious and terrified, she moved the furniture aside and opened the door. To her horror, it revealed a hidden room, its walls lined with strange symbols and markings. The air inside was thick with an oppressive energy, and the whispers became deafening. It was as if the room had been sealed to contain something dark and malevolent. As Sarah stepped into the hidden room, she felt an icy chill wash over her. The room was empty, but the feeling of being watched was overwhelming. The whispers swirled around her, growing louder and more frantic, as if warning her to leave. Suddenly, she felt a cold breath on the back of her neck, followed by a faint touch on her shoulder. She spun around, but no one was there. The fear that gripped her was unlike anything she had ever felt. The house, once her haven, was now a prison, and whatever was haunting her was growing more powerful. Desperate for answers, Sarah searched the room for clues. In a dusty corner, she found an old diary belonging to the previous owner, a reclusive man who had lived alone for decades. The entries revealed that he had been plagued by the same whispers and noises, and had eventually discovered the hidden room. He believed the room was a gateway to another realm, where malevolent spirits resided. The symbols on the walls were meant to keep the spirits at bay, but over time, their power had weakened. Sarah realized with horror that she had unwittingly disturbed the fragile barrier. With the knowledge that the spirits were growing stronger, Sarah knew she had to act quickly. She retraced the symbols on the walls, hoping to restore their power. As she worked, the whispers grew more aggressive, the unseen presence pressing closer. Objects began to move on their own, and the room filled with an icy wind. Just as Sarah finished the last symbol, a loud, guttural growl erupted from behind her. She turned to see a shadowy figure emerging from the darkness, its form twisted and unnatural. With a final surge of strength, Sarah completed the ritual, sealing the gateway. As the last symbol was completed, the shadowy figure let out an agonizing scream and dissolved into the air. The whispers ceased, and the oppressive energy lifted from the house. Exhausted and shaken, Sarah collapsed on the floor. Feeling the peace she once knew return to her home, she had faced the terror within the walls and emerged victorious. But the experience had left her forever changed. From that day on, Sarah never took her solitude for granted, knowing that sometimes the most terrifying horrors are the ones we cannot see. Stay tuned for the next chilling tale of horror. James, a recent college graduate, had just moved into his first apartment in a quiet neighborhood. Eager to start his new life, he embraced the independence that came with living alone. The apartment was small but cozy, perfect for someone like James who valued his solitude. However, his excitement soon faded when he began to notice strange things happening around his home. Objects would be moved from their places. Lights would flicker for no reason, and he often felt like someone was watching him. Little did James know he was not alone, and the entity watching him had sinister intentions. One evening, as James was relaxing on his couch, he heard faint footsteps coming from the hallway. He lived on the top floor, and the sound of someone walking above him was impossible. Confused, he got up and checked the hallway, but it was empty. The footsteps continued, growing louder and closer, but no one was there. James's heart raced as he realized the sound was coming from within his apartment. He rushed back to his living room, but the footsteps followed him, echoing through the walls. The unsettling realization that something invisible was stalking him sent a chill down his spine. Determined to catch the source of the footsteps, James set up a series of traps around his apartment. He placed flour on the floor and balanced objects on door handles, hoping to capture evidence of the intruder. That night, the footsteps returned, louder and more erratic than before. James lay in bed, listening as the sounds moved through his home, waiting for something to happen. When morning came, he inspected the traps. To his horror, the flour showed a trail of footprints leading from his bedroom to the living room, but the door handles were untouched. The intruder was invisible. James was shaken, unsure of what to do next. He reached out to his landlord, who revealed that the previous tenant had moved out suddenly, claiming the apartment was haunted. The landlord brushed it off as nonsense, but James knew better. That night, he heard a voice whisper his name, so faint he almost didn't catch it. It sounded desperate, pleading. "Leave, before it's too late," the voice warned. James's fear grew as he realized the entity haunting his apartment was growing stronger, feeding off his terror. He decided to stay one more night, hoping to find a way to end the torment. Determined to understand what was happening, James did some research on the apartment building. He discovered that it had been built on the site of an old asylum where patients had been mistreated and forgotten. One patient, in particular, had died under mysterious circumstances, and it was said that his spirit lingered, seeking revenge on anyone who dared to live in peace. Armed with this knowledge, James knew he had to find a way to communicate with the spirit and put it to rest. But as he prepared to confront the entity, he felt its presence closing in, more menacing than ever. James set up candles and prepared a makeshift seance, hoping to contact the spirit and end the haunting. As he began to speak, the air in the apartment grew cold, and the lights flickered violently. The footsteps returned, pounding through the walls, and the voice whispered again, "You cannot escape." Suddenly, a force knocked over the candles, plunging the room into darkness. James felt a hand grip his shoulder, ice cold and firm. He turned to see nothing but darkness, yet the grip tightened. Summoning all his courage, he spoke to the spirit, urging it to move on and find peace. The spirit resisted, its presence growing more oppressive. James felt the temperature drop further, and the air became thick with malevolence. The voice, once a whisper, now screamed in rage, shaking the walls. Objects flew across the room and the footsteps thundered around him. James fought to maintain his focus, continuing to speak words of peace and release. As he did, the grip on his shoulder loosened, and the room began to calm. The spirit, realizing it could no longer feed on James's fear, slowly receded. The apartment grew quiet, the oppressive energy lifting as the spirit finally found rest. The haunting had ended, but the experience left James deeply shaken. He knew he had come close to losing himself to the malevolent spirit, and the memory of that cold grip would haunt him forever. Despite the fear and terror, James felt a sense of closure, knowing he had helped a lost soul find peace. He decided to stay in the apartment, but with a newfound respect for the unseen world around him. Alone, but no longer afraid, James understood that some battles must be fought not with weapons, but with courage and compassion. Stay tuned for the next terrifying tale. Stay tuned for the... Lena, a young artist, had recently moved into a historic apartment building known for its charm and character. The building was old, with creaky floors and dim hallways, but Lena loved its vintage appeal. She rented room 303, a cozy space with large windows that let in plenty of light. However, as soon as she moved in, strange things began to happen. Her paintings would be moved, the lights would flicker, and she often felt a cold breeze even with the windows closed. At first, Lena dismissed it as quirks of the old building, but soon she realized something was very wrong. On her first night in room 303, Lena was woken by the sound of heavy breathing near her bed. She sat up, heart pounding, but saw nothing in the darkness. The breathing continued, rhythmic and labored, as if someone was standing right beside her. Terrified, Lena reached for the lamp, but it wouldn't turn on. Panic set in as the breathing grew louder, filling the room. She scrambled out of bed and turned on the overhead light, only to find the room empty. The breathing stopped abruptly, leaving Lena in a silence so thick it felt suffocating. Something was in her room. The next day, Lena found her paintings rearranged, as if someone had been studying them closely. The thought of someone entering her apartment while she slept was unsettling, but there was no sign of forced entry. That night, the breathing returned, along with a faint whisper that she couldn't quite make out. Lena began to feel a constant chill in the air, no matter how high she set the thermostat. She knew she wasn't alone in room 303, but whatever was with her was not of this world. The realization that she had an unwanted guest filled her with dread. Lena decided to investigate the history of the building, hoping to find some explanation for the strange occurrences. She discovered that room 303 had a dark past. Years ago, a man named Mr. Graves had lived there, a reclusive tenant who never left his room. He was found dead in the apartment, his body undiscovered for weeks. It was said that he had gone mad, consumed by paranoia and fear. The neighbors often heard him talking to himself, whispering to the walls. Lena realized with horror that the whispers she heard at night were echoes of Mr. Graves's madness, still lingering in the room. As the days passed, Lena felt the presence of Mr. Graves growing stronger. Her thoughts became clouded, and she struggled to concentrate on her work. At night, she began to hear his voice more clearly, whispering dark thoughts and urging her to stay in the apartment forever. The cold breeze that once felt natural now felt like an icy grip on her soul. Lena knew she was in danger of losing herself to whatever force had taken hold of her apartment. She had to find a way to break free before it was too late, but the pull of the apartment was strong. Desperate, Lena sought the help of a spiritualist who advised her to perform a cleansing ritual to banish the spirit of Mr. Graves. Armed with sage, candles, and a determination to reclaim her home, Lena began the ritual at dusk. As she moved through the apartment, the air grew thick with tension, and the whispers turned to screams. The walls seemed to close in on her, and the temperature dropped to an unbearable cold. But Lena pressed on, reciting the incantations and waving the sage in every corner of the room. The spirit resisted, but she could feel its grip weakening. Just as Lena was about to complete the ritual, the lights flickered and went out, plunging the room into darkness. She felt a cold hand brush against her cheek, and the voice of Mr. Graves echoed in her mind, begging her to stay. Fear threatened to overwhelm her, but Lena knew she couldn't give in. With a final burst of energy, she lit the last candle and chanted the closing words of the ritual. The room erupted in a blinding light, and Lena felt a force being pulled away from her. The oppressive energy lifted, leaving the apartment eerily quiet. When the light faded, Lena found herself alone in the apartment, the cold chill replaced by a warm, peaceful atmosphere. The presence of Mr. Graves was gone, and the whispers had ceased. Exhausted but relieved, Lena collapsed onto her bed, feeling the weight of the past few days lift off her shoulders. She had reclaimed her home, but the experience left her forever changed. Room 303, once a place of creativity and inspiration, had become a reminder of the thin veil between the living and the dead. Stay tuned for more terrifying tales of horror that will haunt your dreams.